I would like to officially call to order the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee today. We have a just a double. I heard some noise. Am I okay?
You're good to proceed.
So I can't hear anything.
I think we're still having some technical difficulties with Commissioner Yamasaki.
Yes, I will work on those. I think we're good to proceed.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everyone to the meeting, and appreciate your grace and patience as we work through technical difficulties since we are meeting on the online platform. As a reminder, the Funding and Achievement Subcommittee does not vote, have official votes, and in fact today we are just here for one informational item, which we will get to following the roll call and adoption of the minutes. But before we go to roll call, I want to extend a very warm welcome to our newest subcommittee member, Commissioner Dembro, who has graciously agreed to be part of our subcommittee. So welcome. We're happy. We're very happy to have you here, and we'll appreciate your insight as we think about the item on today's agenda and in the future. So with that, Guthrie, can we move on to roll call?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Madam Subcommittee Chair, Chair of the Commission, and members of the subcommittee. I will now call roll. Emily Simnett.
Present.
Michael Dembro.
Here.
Richard Devlin. Greg Heyman.
Present.
Gail Yamasaki. And I will note for the record that Commissioner Yamasaki is present, just working through some technical issues. That is roll, and that is a quorum, Madam Chair. I will also note for the record that we are joined by Commissioner Mary Middleton. Thank you.
Thank you, Guthrie. Our first item of business is our sole action item, actually, of the afternoon, and that is to approve the October F&A meeting minutes. So we usually do that with a second and or a motion and a second. Does anyone want to? I will entertain a motion on this.
I move approval of the minutes.
And I see. So Greg was second. So with that, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Okay. I think we can move on to our next item. Our next item is public testimony. Guthrie, do we have anyone signed up to offer public testimony today?
Yes, we do, Madam Vice Chair. We have a sign up from Jamie Moffett with the University of Oregon. You should be promoted in the meeting to turn on video and audio now.
Excellent. Great. Before I get started, can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. Well, Chair Hammond, Chair Simnett, members of the commission, thanks for the opportunity to speak with you for a couple of minutes this morning, I guess this afternoon. For the record, my name is Jamie Moffett. I am the Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration and CFO at the University of Oregon. I'm also currently serving as the chair of the Vice Presidents for Finance and Administration Council, which has representatives from all 7 public universities. And it's in that capacity, with that collective voice, that I'm coming to speak today. Wanted to provide just a few comments on the draft budget note that you're going to be discussing. I wanted to start off by just thanking the staff for the considerable work that went into this. It was a very, very comprehensive report with lots of data, lots of analysis. While I may not agree with every single conclusion of the report, I do really want to acknowledge the amount of work that went into it. I have 3 points that I wanted to share with you, and I will try to do that as quickly as possible so you can get moving with your discussions. The first is, I was hoping that you could focus on an analysis the team put together for you on slide 10 of your packet. And the reason I'm asking you to focus on that is because it's an overall assessment of how much, on average, the university's costs have grown each year compared to other public entities that have similar structures and are facing similar cost drivers. And I just wanted to emphasize the point that a lot of our budget is tied up in people. We're universities, and that's what's to be expected. But some of the costs that are growing the greatest and the most quickly are related to people and labor. And so we've seen increases in our negotiated labor agreements. We've seen dramatic increases in our healthcare costs, that is the state healthcare, and our PERS costs for retirement. And so when you look at our average cost increases per year, they are roughly in line with other state entities that are facing similar cost pressures. And so I just was hoping that context was out there for the group. The second point that I wanted to make also actually relates to slide 10 conveniently. There's an analysis of the different buckets of costs that have grown at the institutions. And one of the points that the report makes is that if you look at the different cost buckets, the bucket that's labeled institutional support has grown more quickly than some of the others. And there is a hypothesis in the report that this is partially at least due to the fact that the universities have pulled out of some of the shared services that were established when the chancellor's office was removed. And I just want to share with you that there are many, many things that are causing that bucket of cost to go up, but we do not believe that those decisions made by the university around shared services were a big driver of that cost. And let me explain why. The group that was set up in 2015, I think it shares in your report, it was a little over 30 people. I think the total budget was about 4.8 million. And it was basically set up to provide shared services. It was set up as voluntary so that each institution could assess whether that was the most effective way for them to get services. And through the years, many of us did decide that we could do things more cost effectively ourselves. I think you have to think about it in the context of institutional support costs. The entire bucket of costs in 2015 for all 7 campuses was 191.5 million. It was a very large number because it included a lot of different functions. The shared services unit was 4.8 million. So even if you think that we lost some efficiency from moving away from that, it was not, in our eyes, the main driver of cost increases. You might be asking, well, what was the main driver? I would share that in looking at those numbers, the costs in that bucket increased dramatically because of benefits costs, so PERS and PEB and those things. There also are some costs in that bucket that uniquely increased faster over the last 10 years than others. And I will just highlight a few. Administrative IT is in that bucket. And so you see very large cost increases related to ERP systems, cybersecurity, applications and vendors we have to work with. Insurance costs are in that bucket. And so you've seen dramatic increases in insurance over that time period. And then that is a bucket of costs that often reflects staffing we need to put in place to respond to changes in state and federal regulations. So I would point to the Oregon Equal Pay Act, which requires a lot of work from our HR team around class and compensation, as well as things like Title IX investigators to respond to Title IX issues and sexual assault issues. So there's a lot of unique costs in that bucket that grew very, very quickly. The final point I just wanted to make is I really appreciate that the report acknowledges that while gross tuition has been growing above inflation, that we've managed to keep average net tuition after scholarships and fee remissions growing at a lower rate than inflation. And I think there are a lot of things that contributed to that, including increased support for students, as well as university actions. And I will just close by saying the universities are taking the cost issue with our universities very seriously. And through the years, there's been a lot of work done to try to reduce costs. In particular, I would just point out that this year, we asked each of the institutions kind of what efforts have you had on the cost cutting front. And in total, across our 7 campuses, we are in the process of reducing our budgets by a little over $85 million recurring. That actually, unfortunately, did affect a lot of positions because it's very hard to do budget cuts without affecting personnel. Across our campus, that was over 500 positions that were eliminated. Of those positions, over 180, and that's an estimate across campuses, were actually filled positions. So really hard actions that institutions had to take. So in closing, I would just say that, we're open to looking at ideas and ways that we can save money. I should point out that we do actually have a lot of shared services that we work with collectively. So my campus hosts retirement plans for all of the 7 other campuses around voluntary 403B and optional retirement plan. There's a shared service around insurance that many campuses participate, treasury management, other things. And we certainly are open to always looking at new ideas, but we want to make sure that the things we're looking at are cost effective and are going to produce the best results. So with that, again, I just want to thank folks for the work that was done, and know that we're looking at it very carefully, as you are as well. I just came from a meeting where we were all talking about the report across the campuses, trying to think about recommendations we could suggest. So the universities are taking it very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments today. Guthrie, are we ready? Ready to move on to the next?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's the conclusion of our signed up public comment.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we'll move to the sole item of the meeting, which and we'll hear from Jim Pinkard about the draft report, the 2025 legislative budget note on university efficiency and shared services. So I'll turn it over to Jim to give us the overview, and then following that, we'll open up to questions and discussion.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Jim Pinker with the Office of Post-Secondary Finance and Capital. I'm trying to share my screen, and I clicked on a different button. So bear with me as I use the technology. Hopefully you can see the slide deck in front of you. And at any time, great. And at any time, if you have questions, please feel free to interrupt me with questions, and I'll rely on Guthrie and others for pointing those out as they come. I do want to say, for the record, my name is Jim Pinker with the Office of Post-Secondary Finance and Capital. And our hope today is to walk you through the draft budget note report. It's something we've been working on this past summer and into the fall. And our hope is to provide you with an update on where we're at process-wise, discuss the key findings, invite your perspective, and perhaps receive a little direction for potential recommendations. As Chair Simnett noted, you will not be expected to take any action on this report until next month in December, but we wanted today to take some time just to highlight the important bits and answer some questions. It's a big report with lots of data for which the context is important. But this report contains information about spending at the Oregon Public Universities, considers cost efficiency, really through 3 sections of analysis, kind of highlighted in the green sections, circles in the middle of the slide. Student costs, university spending and staffing, and cost efficiency. We'll go through each one. This report is required by a budget note, which is in our budget build, which is in our budget bill, and it builds on the sustainability report for the public universities that we presented back in June at the FNA. So on the right-hand side of the slide, you'll note the budget note does ask us to assess spending and cost efficiency, mandates the inclusion of certain components. It does state the report may include recommendations for coordinated collaborative efforts to reduce institution costs and student costs of attendance over time. As for the process, we have outlined 2 rounds of consultation and feedback with our partners. I do want to say when I use the phrase partners, I mean DAS, LFO, the Legislative Policy Research Office, the universities themselves, other HECC staff, mainly through the executive team. So all 8 of the office directors received a copy of this report and had the opportunity to provide feedback. I do want to express my appreciation for our Director of Communications and Heart again for providing some really important feedback. And I want to express my appreciation for all of the folks who've put eyes on this report and have included comments and notes and suggestions. And so it's been great to date and has really improved this report, and we hope to continue to do so. We do expect any final feedback later this month by November 17th as we look to finalize the report with recommendations for your consideration in December as we look to submit the report in January to the legislature. As for the data and analysis, just kind of a few notes to provide context. The data in the report comes from public and currently available sources. The general time frame for the analysis is the past decade, although the exact periods do vary from table to table because of data availability. So the exact 10-year period can change slightly by a year or two. The data is not generally adjusted for inflation or regional cost of living. And I think some people would prefer that we use regional costs, but some of that data is incomplete and unavailable. We do, however, in the report, instead of adjusting for inflation, we do include an annual growth rate calculated that we compare to inflation, and then we include national averages for context. I should note the annual average growth rate in the report is a compound annual growth rate, which just means it's smoothed over time to account for volatility from year to year. So it's not just a simple average of the year-to-year change. A couple more notes regarding inflation. We are using the Consumer Price Index as our comparator, and I know that's a bit controversial, largely because the CPI metric is based predominantly on housing, transportation, and food, which makes up 80% of that calculation. And so you may also be familiar with the PCE, or the Personal Consumption Expenditures metric, used by DAS in the quarterly revenue forecast and also by the Federal Reserve, which is a little different than CPI, but still based on goods and services consumed by households. Obviously, the universities spend a little differently than households. Most of their spending is for wages and benefits. Therefore, a better gauge of inflation for them is the higher education cost adjustment, which we use in Ways and Means slides and other venues. We do not use that factor in this report simply because we're comparing to CPI for the benefit of a larger audience, since the CPI tends to be a little more accessible and a little more broadly understood. But we do in the appendix include a comparison of CPI and HECC over time, which does show that university inflation or cost growth generally exceeds that of consumer-based inflation, which I think is an important point. We do also want to provide a note of caution because the data in this report is really used for, to support aggregate findings across the universities, kind of as a system. So we're not including this information and intending it to be used to compare one university to another, since the universities individually face, very different circumstances that could make direct comparison less helpful. So our hope is that this fact-based objective information will support larger conversations around financial sustainability, kind of as it relates to Oregon as a system of higher education. The first section of the report focuses on student costs. You may remember a conversation last August of 2024 with the full commission about the different elements of the cost of attendance and how they changed over time. And you also may remember a conversation just this past February through the F&A meeting where we talked about some of these components. But this section of the report builds on those conversations and other high-quality student affordability work published by HECC, OSAC, and Office of Research and Data. And I appreciate all the work they do on affordability through them. But what we found in the report is that the published or sticker price for student and fees has in fact grown faster than consumer inflation. However, the average net price, or what students actually paid for the total cost of attendance after financial aid is applied, has grown less than inflation over time. We have also found that student affordability has improved recently due to investments by the state in financial aid, largely through OOG and other financial aid programs. And student financial aid, or student affordability, has improved because the universities have increased their commitment to institutional financial aid, largely through remissions. But I have to point out, it's important to remember when we look at the average net price, it's for students who receive federal financial aid. And we know about a quarter of the students on our campuses don't apply for financial aid, and about 1/3 do not receive financial aid. So there's a bit of an issue with the data. But speaking of student affordability, and again, I think we showed some of this, at least the chart on the left-hand side of this slide back in February. We have seen progress over time, and yet under this measurement, half of the students can't afford the cost of attendance with available resources. So some progress has been made, but you can also see the dip in the recent years on the left-hand side of the chart was due to the pandemic as a result of additional federal financial aid dollars for students specifically, and federal financial aid provided to the institutions that they chose to use for their students. But those dollars were temporary and they're just one-time funding. So another way to consider this issue is through the right-hand side of this chart, where we look at the average net price by family income. So this is averaged across all 7 of the universities. The statewide average net price is from the data dashboard and shows on average for students who did receive federal financial aid, they paid in 22-23, academic year 22-23, they paid $18,564 for tuition and fees, room and board. So that's total cost of attendance, tuition and fees, room and board. And again, that's an average. So it might be higher or lower dependent upon what university. That amount did vary by income level, by family income level. So the by family income level data does come from the U.S. Department of Education's college scorecard. Again, this is averaged across all 7. So you can see those numbers by family income level. I do think it's important to be clear that Oregon students are facing tuition and fee rates that are higher than those in our neighbor states. And so this is yet again a bit of a different way to look at this affordability issue. These are published rates or sticker prices for tuition and fees. So this is not the full cost of attendance. And of course, we know that students aren't paying these particular rates because this is before financial aid is applied. But nonetheless, I'm using this to compare to our neighbor states. And we're looking to compare it to the median household income. So again, this is median or the middle household income, not an average for those states. And then we express it as a cost of the median household income. So what did tuition and fees cost as a percent of the median household income? Our neighboring states are in the 10 to 11% range. Here in Oregon, we're at the 15.5% range. So undeniably, our students are facing higher tuition and fee rates. And I believe that's in part due to state funding. And you can see in the right-hand side, the state funding per FTE in Oregon for our 4-year institutions has trailed the national average and the average of our border states over time. To give credit where credit's due, in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen substantial increases in the amount of state funding available through the Public University Support Fund, through financial aid, through capital, through state-backed bonds. But because during the Great Recession, the state had to cut funding so drastically, we kind of dug ourselves a hole that we really haven't been able to get out of. So recent growth in that, but looking at this data, it appears that if the state funding per FTE were to increase here in Oregon to the average of our neighbor states, and assuming all that revenue was used entirely to offset the cost of tuition and fees, it would likely be that the tuition and fee rates here in Oregon would be around what our border state partners, our border state folks charge. So moving on to kind of the second section of the report, where we focus on university spending. In general, when we look at spending, we can see that the growth in spending has exceeded inflation over time. And again, that's consistent with other labor-intensive public entities, as you heard Vice President Moffitt point out on the very next slide. This information, when we look at all funds, that's for all funds across the university, right? And that's comparable to the national experience. And so what we've seen occurring at our public universities in Oregon is very similar to what the experience has been in other states for their public universities as well. So the trend in Oregon is not unlike or dissimilar from what other public universities in other states are facing. By category, we can see institution support and public service are outliers. We'll talk a little bit more about that. As we look at wages and benefits specifically, and we look at expenses by natural classification as opposed to functional classification, we'll get into that a little bit. I should also note debt service. We do address that in the report. The amount paid for debt service by the universities has increased slightly, and the value of long-term debt has increased. But it's important to note most of the capital construction funding for the universities in the last decade has really been state-backed bonds, Article 11 G and Q bonds, with some Article 11F bonds as well. So when we look at this, yeah.
I see that Gray, our Chair Heyman has his hand up, and I just wanted to make sure you saw that, because in case this was a question that needed to be asked before you continue.
Yeah.
It's quickly going back 2 pages. I think it's slide 8. I did want to note, because it's that one of the challenges we have, and it affects your calculation here, is that the median household income in our state is, in the case of California, certainly significantly less than perhaps our 2 most, I guess, affected border states, California and Washington. And due to, we have a different mix of employment opportunities in the state, and I'm wondering if you have thought about, one of the ways, I guess I've advocated that one of the ways to address this issue, it's not germane to this report, is that we develop a corresponding economic strategy that creates the possibility of a different employment and economic opportunity mix in our state that would, because if our average or median household income was $90,000, our share of income wouldn't look that much different than the other states. Any thoughts on that?
Well, the only thought that comes to mind is that is a component of what we heard expressed by NCHAMS, the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, when they produced a report back in 2022, the Oregon Higher Education Landscape Study. They were in that report very clear in echoing that sentiment. They were pretty specific about encouraging Oregon to come up with a statewide economic development strategy. And so, I think there's part of that work going on through OE and Business Oregon and other entities in the state. But that's kind of what comes to my mind. But I think personally, I did note when I pulled this data from the U.S. Census Bureau, which is the American Community Surveys instrument that they use, and looking at that amongst the states, I was kind of surprised by just regionally compared to our neighboring states. I was surprised by the 80,000 in median income compared to, California, Washington, and the average. So,
thank you.
Chair, I have a question also, since we're on this slide. Jim, did you say that the comparisons of state funding include or don't include financial aid contributions?
They do include financial aid contributions. And so that's, I think, a really good question and an important point to be made. When in this data, when we say that Oregon is $6,451, this is only for the 4-year universities. So it is sector specific, number one. Number two, it predominantly includes the Public University Support Fund, state programs, statewide public services, and statewide financial aid programs, so OOG. It does not include research funding, some of the public service funding. It does not include OHSU funding. It does not include capital funding of any kind. And that last comment about capital funding, I think, is pretty important because in Oregon, we fund capital construction differently and frankly better than they do in other states. And so this only looks at, state funding through the PUSF. It does not include capital. And one of the points that a conversation I was recently having with a colleague in another state, they said, well, we don't provide any capital funding to our institutions. They're completely on their own. And then I was having a conversation with another person who said, your Oregon University is actually, from a debt service capacity, they actually look really good. They have a low debt service capacity. And in my mind, I was like, and I think that's partly because of how we fund capital construction. So I think there's some context in there in those numbers that's important, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that question.
Thanks. And one other question that I was thinking about as I was reading the report, are these numbers just for undergraduates, or do they also include graduate students?
The tuition and fee numbers do include undergraduate students only. The state funding for FTE numbers are all students.
And I should know this, but do we reimburse does the state provide funding for on an FTE basis for graduate students in the same way they do for undergrads?
We do, through the student success and completion model, the public university funding distribution model, we do fund both undergraduate resident students and graduate resident students. We fund undergraduate resident students more. There was a policy decision made that we've continued to really prioritize undergraduate students to a greater extent than the graduate students, really through the use of cost weights by discipline.
If I could jump in here and just go quickly back to Commissioner Dembro's first question that related to sort of affordability, as I heard it, and this chart. And Jim, you focused in your answer on the state funding per FTE comparisons and the inclusion of opportunity grant dollars, for example, that are associated with the universities in those numbers. But what I thought I might have heard in Commissioner Dembro's question was sort of a thought I had, and it may be something you want to respond to, Jim, which is you alluded when you presented this slide that the tuition and fee comparisons here that show Oregon so much higher are different. This is not what students are actually paying, right? This is the sticker price. This is a comparison of sticker price. And so I don't know whether on a net price basis, Oregon would look, like similarly like an outlier or not, but this may be an area to like further develop as we continue to work on this report. Because I think you've rightly emphasized in the last slide that the progress that we've made in terms of net price as a state, and then here we're back into the sticker price, and it at least raises the question, well, yeah, we're $4,000 higher than Idaho, but maybe on a net price basis we're only $2,000 higher than Idaho.
Yeah, and I wish we could use. We don't have the data to do that, unfortunately. Because typically the data we have will take the tuition and fees plus room and board and express it on a total cost of attendance. Then we apply financial aid to that total cost of attendance, because financial aid can be applied to tuition and fees, room and board, transportation costs, the like. So we don't have the portion of financial aid that is applied only to tuition and fees. But I think we could do some work on that, I think. Like there's a way to do some work on that. I was going to point out though quickly that the average discount rate that we found is 40%. So students who receive financial aid pay 40% less than sticker price on average. When we look nationally, that number is closer to like 33, 35%. So I think there is room to conclude that in Oregon, we are trying to help as much as we possibly can through the use of financial aid, through state-based financial aid and institution-based financial aid. So in the report, we do mention, the growth in remissions funding that in just the last, 5 years has more than doubled, for our public universities. So in the last fiscal year, they had committed over $247 million to remissions, and so they're trying to help the cause as well.
So I think unless there's any additional questions about this slide, we're ready to move on with the presentation.
Okay, I appreciate it. So I think we left with this slide where we're pivoting to the second component of the report, university spending. We have seen on an all funds basis, the growth in spending having exceeded inflation, consistent with other labor intensive public entities. And we'll talk about the categories where, and Vice President Moffitt noted this in her public comments, where we have seen by category, and of course this is by functional category. So instruction, research, public service. This is not by natural category, although in the report there is a table that does take this and present it by natural category, which would be wages and benefits and services and supplies and other costs. But when we look at the public universities as a proportion of and research, over the period that we analyzed, dropped from 43% to 37%, while spending on public service and institutional support has grown from 14% to 19%. I think the growth in public service can in part be attributed to the growth in revenues for that, including a doubling of appropriated amounts for state programs and statewide public services since the 2015-17 biennium. A lot of that monies in state programs and statewide public services is used for various public services performed. And also spending on public services has grown due to the relationships with federal partners and other partners to provide services, including wildfire training, early childhood education, healthcare services, and others. The growth in spending on academic support and student services, I think, can be attributed to the increase in demand for tailored efforts that focus on support for student completion and success. We've seen universities over time really invest in wraparound student support services to help their students complete their educational journey and achieve their version of success. And so that comes with a cost. The growth in spending for institution support, which includes, communications, legal, financial, accounting, space planning, procurement, IT, all the related business services. I do think it is due to some factors like insurance, compliance, and technology, but I do think shared services going forward can play a role in addressing the increasing cost of providing institution support, and I'll talk about that in a second. But I think also, too, some of this spending can result from, a university operating below its optimal enrollment threshold, which results in institution support costs consuming a disproportionate share of operating budgets. So when you have a situation where your enrollment is flat or maybe declining for some, but your operating infrastructure doesn't change to accommodate that, you could have you could have a situation where you're operating below your optimal enrollment threshold. I should point out on this chart, the growth in the other category of 11.5% is masked by changes in net pension liabilities. If you were to take that out, it would be the growth in that category would be consistent with the overall total. When we look at the E&G fund or general fund spending by itself, we can see that 77% of all the spending is for salaries, wages, and related benefits, and then the remaining 23% for services and supplies and other costs. Those other costs do include fund transfers. General fund money or E&G fund money might be transferred out for building support, capital construction projects, or other points. So this, though, table on the right-hand side of this slide does look at spending by natural classification. So we have wages, we have health benefits, we have retirement benefits, other benefits, which is largely payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, contributions. And we can see very clearly spending for retirement benefits has grown more than double that of wages. So the Oregon Public Universities spend more on employee benefits as a percent of wages than other states do, and that's a policy choice. I should point out that the 7.2% growth for retirement benefits is a compound annual growth rate. That means it has been smoothed for volatility. If you were to look at a simple average of the year-to-year change over the time period we analyzed, it would be a 9% change. Because there has been such significant volatility in the year-to-year change, anywhere from a decrease of 18% to an increase of 49% from year to year during the period noted, the last couple of years, spending growth for retirement benefits has been in the 10 to 11% per year range. And I think spending for services and supplies can be attributed to cost growth in technology costs, insurance, other support costs, as Vice President Moffitt noted earlier. When we look at university staffing, we note that staffing has grown while enrollment has declined with variation by university. Most of the growth has been in student academic affairs and institution support areas. And so this data in terms of the student to staff ratio and the student faculty ratio, both declining 14 to 15%, is largely because the number of student FTE are down while the number of faculty and staff FTE are up over time. I should note that changes in staffing levels are not always correlated to cost inefficiency. For example, staffing may be mandated as part of a grant due to investments by state, federal, or local partners. So staffing might be mandated, or the universities might make business decisions to forego outsourcing certain functions, which may also impact staffing levels. So declining ratios can result also from operating below optimal enrollment thresholds. So where you have a structural cost inefficiency for no other reason than your enrollment and your staffing isn't moving the same direction at the same time. Because as you can imagine, staffing changes can take time to occur, right? So, and it's not a one-to-one relationship either. If enrollment increases 2%, it's not a foregone conclusion that staffing will need to increase 2%. The same is true the opposite direction. If your enrollment declines 2%, your staffing may not decline 2% either. So there's no ideal or perfect outcome for this measure, but these metrics can be considered within a larger effort to assess financial sustainability over time. The question becoming for the governing boards is, if we have a situation where we're operating, below optimal enrollment thresholds because of declining enrollment, how does that affect our financial sustainability, and can we afford it? Is the question.
Hey, Jim, I just want to note there's a couple of hands came up, and I believe it was on that last slide.
Okay.
First, Commissioner Dembro, followed by Commissioner Yamasaki.
Thanks, Chair. Actually, my question goes back to the previous discussion about the retirement benefits, the PERS benefits. And it's just kind of a factual question. Do any of the universities have side accounts to further, smooth out the obligation? And if so, is that an individual university by university decision?
It is. I see that Vice President Moffitt is still with us, and so I might ask her to join me for a response. But my understanding is that yes, the universities do have side accounts, and the decision to invest in those is a university decision, a governing board decision, and I think that's dependent upon circumstance. Jamie, would you offer?
Yeah, I would. So we have a few side accounts that we've invested at the University of Oregon, and mainly we're trying to take advantage. The state had a program with a 25% match recently, and so that was a really great way. I don't know that all universities were positioned to take advantage of that, or were in a position where they could do so, but that is absolutely a university by university governing board decision.
And was that ever considered as part of the shared services enterprise? Or could it have qualified in that way? Jamie, do you know?
I do not believe that was ever looked at from a shared services enterprise. And that is something that I think different universities, again, I mean, you had to invest considerable funds and tie them up, in our case, for a 20-year period. Now, we did the analysis and said with the state match, that is a good, if we would have invested these funds in other places long-term, that is a really good thing for us to do. But I think each school, it does tie up funds for a long period of time. And so depending on where schools sat from a liquidity standpoint, they might have looked at that differently. But that was not something that we looked at. The opportunity was presented equally to each institution. And in some ways, it's easier for each of us to have our own accounts with PERS than have a commingled account that suddenly then has to also be managed and administratively dispersed.
And I'll quickly note, Senator Dembro, you may or may not be thinking about the colleges where they have issued joint pension obligation bonds in the past, like the K through 12 districts have, and we've entered into revenue deferment agreements with them as a credit enhancement. And so I don't think we've done that for the universities, but the colleges have and the K through 12 districts have. So.
Great, thanks.
So I think Commissioner Yamasaki was next, and then Chair Heyman.
Thanks, Jim. So Jim, on the university staffing, I just have a quick question. On the staffing in student academic affairs, does that also take into consideration the contractors, or are these just employees?
That is a really good question. We got this information from IPEDS, and then there's separately a report that Dr. Amy Cox and her team in HECC R&D, they report every year university staffing. In fact, it's on the agenda for tomorrow's full commission meeting. I think the answer is no. I don't think it includes contractors. I'm pretty sure of that, but I'd have to double check.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Chair Heyman?
Yeah, Jim, could you go back to page 11 again? Just help me to understand in the total column, total row, sorry, it indicates something close to a 400 and some thousand increase in total costs, which is significantly over 3.9%. So I just wondered what's going on there.
Yeah, good question. So the 3.9% is the average annual growth rate, not the variance or difference between the two numbers presented. If that
Although
makes
it
sense.
although it is that in the other rows. Is that correct?
No, the growth rate column is the the compound annual growth rate between those two numbers over time. It's not a simple, just a variance calculation. It's probably very close, to be fair, right? So if I were to take like the wages and I were to take one minus the other and then subtract and then divide by 10, it would probably be very close to 3.4, simply because arithmetic, the growth rate is pretty consistent over time. But when there's substantial volatility, like for retirement, those two numbers are going to be very, very different.
Okay, well, I just wondered because in the total row, the difference is about 30%. So,
yeah.
Anyway, it might require some explanation. It seems confusing to me. So, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're ready to continue.
Okay, and I know that we have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to pick up the pace just slightly. And I'm going to leave the presentation kind of in the format I have currently so that I can pick up on questions. As we look at the third section of the report and we try to tease out efficiency, and this we call cost efficiency, you could also say it's productivity or operating efficiency, maybe there's a better title, but we really look at two metrics: degree productivity over time, spending per completions. Both metrics have improved over time, suggesting improved efficiency. These two metrics were selected in light of a recent report published by a national consulting group called RPK Group. They have been working in the higher education space for a long time. And I didn't want to choose 10 metrics when 2 will do the trick, right? So I will, though, be clear that these metrics may lack a level of detail and nuance likely needed at the campus or board level. So the boards will likely get into, much more nuanced and detailed conversations and have more metrics that they interact with when they make governing decisions. But just through these two metrics, and again, these were also informed by work done about 15 years ago called the Delta Project on Post-Secondary Education Cost, Productivity, and Accountability. But nonetheless, it's a good news story where the number of degree completions per 1,000 students enrolled, and we calculate it that way to account for enrollment changes, but that's increased 5.4% in the aggregate. And the number of completions that were generated per $100,000 in spending has increased over time in the aggregate as well, with that metric improving for all of the universities. So I do want to share good news story. There's more information in the report by university and over time, and you can see a little more detail in the report. We do want to talk briefly about shared services. I do think that the shared administrative services that currently exist, the University Shared Services Enterprise, was established, of course, back in 2015. I think it's important to note, the public universities were members of OUS for a long time, right, from 1931 on, and then in 2015, when OUS was dissolved, all the universities had the choice and the option to establish their own boards. And that decision and the decision to create USSC was kind of, I believe, a short-term decision, but it was made at a time when the colleges and universities were kind of near the peak at their student enrollment experience in the last 15, 20 years, and also during a time when colleges and universities around the country were creating partnerships and collaborations to share back office costs. So while USSC may or may not have led to an increase in institutional support costs, I think going forward, it would be prudent and appropriate to look at how perhaps our universities can share these services going forward to bend the cost curve, because I don't foresee a set of circumstances going forward where revenues will keep pace with spending and where spending is going to automatically come down on its own. I see the price pressure, the spending pressure, I see it increasing. And so I think there's real opportunity going forward. And part of the True Plus PSU financial sustainability state investment that we received last biennium, and we're continuing this biennium with the 5 universities, including PSU, focuses on this issue. The universities are working with a third-party consultant called CampusWorks to assess on their campuses what are the next tangible incremental steps that they can take to implement shared services that they have already identified as the most viable for sharing. So I'm really excited about that work. That work is going to be done through this next spring, and we're hoping late next spring, next summer, to bring back to all of you a summary and a review of what those possibilities look like. Again, for concrete next steps, not just what's possible, but beyond that, what is actually possible, what's preferred, what do the universities prefer to share, and what are the next tangible steps that we're actually going to take at the campus level to implement that shared services. So I'm excited about that work. I hope the universities are. More to come on that. I will mention that there's a lot more information in the report about how the universities are reporting on how they control cost drivers. And there's information on pages 31 and 32 regarding recent budget actions. That 2-page section of the report, I think, is really important contextually. So you'll have a really good understanding of kind of the recent development in budget planning on all 7 of the universities in the last 6 months to a year. But if I were to wrap this up, land the plane as it were, and give you the 3 key conclusions or takeaways, the very first one, admittedly, is the same one I shared back in June. The universities are facing structural budget deficits, and they remain vulnerable to cost pressures. Many of them, if not all of them, are taking steps to address existing budget gaps. And some of that's pretty painful, no doubt. The short-term revenue outlook going forward, specifically for state funding, suggests that structural gaps will persist. This is due to enrollment challenges and the fact that state funding could be affected by exogenous issues, external issues. The third point, it's difficult to see how financial sustainability for our 7 universities will be achieved without improved operational or cost efficiency going forward. So I think there's opportunity for more efficiencies, for them to focus more on their missions and maybe outsource more, whatever that looks like. I'm hopeful to have a conversation with our universities. I know they're focusing on this with their boards. They're doing a lot of work on this already. So I want to give credit where credit's due. But if I were to look at this as a system that benefits all Oregonians, a system of 7 universities, I think there's a lot of work we can do going forward. That work may be challenging. It likely won't be cheap either. And it might be complicated based on the low-hanging fruit versus the comprehensive nature of changing the status quo. So with that in mind, there's a last slide where we reference policy implications, and I didn't know if Ben wanted to address these. So I'll pause briefly for Ben's preference.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I mean, I know we're at time, and maybe just leave this slide for commissioners who may have final thoughts in response to, this slide or other findings contained within the report. This slide attempts to start to encourage, push towards recommendations. And so knowing that we have, 30 seconds to a minute and a half left, we're not going to get very far in that discussion. I guess, I think part of what we can do is welcome your feedback in writing or via a phone call to me and Jim. We can set up time and meet with you individually to hear your thoughts about what this report should recommend.
And I just want to say, I mean, it really is 30 seconds. So I wanted to, first of all, say great appreciation to the staff, to the process. I really appreciate the reference to the collaboration and the process. And the detail of the report and the time that you took, Jim, today with us to answer a lot of questions. The report raises a lot of questions, and I think this illustrates that we want to make sure that we have the right facts and the right understanding of the facts as we move forward in what, by the report's conclusions is a really serious situation. So I would highly encourage commissioners in this meeting to reach out to Ben as he suggested, with your thoughts, your ideas, additional questions. I will just say that I think we are at a point where bold action is required, and it also means that we're at an exciting point too, where we could, as a state, really make a difference in higher education, cost to students, and how it's delivered. So I mean, I think we're at 2:00 and the meeting goes till 2. I don't know if there's no wiggle room, so I think I have to call the meeting to the close. Is that true, Guthrie?
If folks if folks want to hang on for another couple of minutes, I'm sure we can continue to support the meeting. So I'm not running off. Recognize that, Chair Sim, that you may have time constraints. It's really up to you in terms of how you want to end the meeting.
Well, I'm happy to I can stick around for a little while longer if anyone else wants to, given that this is just an information and discussion session and not a vote. But I'm happy to give the other commissioners a chance to have their elevator speech about next steps for the commission. And so I see Commissioner Dembro and Commissioner Yamasaki, followed by Commissioner Yamasaki.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll hold off on my elevator speech, but I do have a question. Jim, in laying out the process that the HECC has gone through in response to the budget note, some feedback has come in from the universities, and I'm just wondering if we could see that, just to help us as we're preparing for the next meeting.
Happy to share it. Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, to their great credit, I think they gave me something like 25 pages worth of notes and feedback. So yeah, happy to share. Yeah.
And will you share that with the full subcommittee, Jim? Or at least me too.
Yeah, I'm happy to. It strikes me that I should probably first ask them if they're okay with it. So let me do that. But I don't think they'll be opposed to it. But happy to.
And we have another round coming, just to be clear. So it's an iterative process. So we got the draft you're seeing is reflecting the feedback, or at least some of the feedback we received on the first draft. Now you're getting a second. Now we're getting another round within the next 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Yamasaki.
So just a quick question, Jim. Who sets the optimal enrollment levels for the universities?
The boards do. Yeah.
So they're not. So would that imply that they're not necessarily consistent, that each individual university sets their own optimal enrollment levels?
I don't know that. I don't know that the universities actually establish an official, like, here's our optimal enrollment, because in my time in higher ed, have never come across a university president, a faculty member who didn't want to serve more students. And I've never come across any one of our higher ed partners who didn't want to serve more students and would say no to serving more students. And so when I reference optimal enrollment, really what I'm talking about is the enrollment vis-a-vis their operational structure, their infrastructure. So what we've seen in the last 15, 20 years really is we've seen at some of our universities and community colleges, we've seen enrollment drop precipitously faster than really the institution can adjust its operations. And so, because it takes time to make adjustments, right? So if you have a situation where you have 10,000 students and you have a certain number of faculty and staff to serve those 10,000 students, but what happens when 25% of your students, you know, your enrollment drops by 25% over 10 years? Your faculty and staff, you know, your level of staffing may not adjust quickly enough, right? So there's probably some adjustment that's needed in that scenario. How much of an adjustment is needed is up to the governing board to decide, and based on a very complicated and numerous set of circumstances. But what we've seen over time, I know one of the institutions, they saw their enrollment drop about 45% over 10 years. This is one of the colleges. And their staffing dropped about 20%. And what that meant was their student to staff ratio increase or dropped as well, right? So it dropped from like 17 or 18 students for every staff member to about 13 students for every staff member. So the question then is, that's not inherently good or bad by itself. The question then is, can they afford it, right? So in that particular example, that's actual data from one of our colleges. Not picking on the colleges, just it's the example that I have on my mind. But I calculated, I said, well, what would it take to the level of staffing to get back to the 16 or 17, you know, to 1 ratio? They would have to cut staffing another 30 to 40%. So you're asking a staff, you know, a community of staff that has already seen 20 to 25% of their colleagues get reduced to face another 25 to 30% reduction. That can be really, really hard in terms of a change management perspective, and just, you know, from an empathy perspective, it can be really hard to ask a staffing community to do that. So, but over time, you know, through natural attrition, through retirements, and you can achieve the same, but can you balance the finances in that time, right? So that's really what I'm talking about when I say, you know, operational efficiency and optimization, optimal levels, both for faculty and enrollment, you know, faculty, staff, and enrollment.
Really curious that, you know, how many of those optimal enrollment levels are really taught by TAs versus faculty, especially in our larger universities and the undergraduate, they're large undergraduate programs. But I would just be curious about that. Yeah,
I appreciate that. I don't want to get out ahead of my skis and promise on behalf of a colleague, but what I can say is I think some of that part-time versus full-time faculty, some of that data is teased out in the university staffing report that you'll see tomorrow for the full commission. So I'm hoping some of that might provide somewhat of an answer for you. So.
Okay, I think we have done it, and we're only 8 minutes over. It was a very I think rich and productive question session for sure, and I hope I look forward to seeing the recommendations and the revisions to the report as it comes back in front of the commission. So again, huge thanks, Jim. Huge thanks to your work and the clarity of your report. Okay, I'm closing it. Or calling it, no, ending it. I don't have a gavel. I'm calling the meeting to a close.
Meeting adjourned.
thanks, Emily.
Meeting
Bye.
adjourned. That's it. I knew there was a right term. Thank you.